Dr. Box, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me today.
You're welcome.
So let's start with your decision to retire.
Oh, okay.
Get right to it. So
Sure.
You're going to retire this summer. You've made that announcement.
Yes.
But you've been at KCTCS for quite some time, and you've
Yes.
been at the helm since 2014.
Correct.
So what led you to the decision that this is the right time for you to retire?
You are correct. I've been in Kentucky in the Kentucky Community and Technical College system for 18 years now. Started as president at Hazard Community and Technical College and then moved to the system office back in 2007. But been president now for 5 years. And the big change that I tried to bring about once I became president of the system was to move us away from a purely access agenda, which had been pretty much the focus for the first 10 to 15 years of KCTCS, to a completion agenda where we're putting a lot of attention on not only getting people in the door, but getting them through the educational pipeline with a credential and into the workforce or into a university.
So why did you think now is the time for you to retire?
Because if you look at our national standing, we've moved up into the top 10 in several categories and several polls in production. We are 8th in the nation with number of credentials awarded and number 2 in the nation in credentials awarded per capita, which shows that we are getting people through the pipeline. So we've accomplished quite a bit in that arena. We are getting people educated and to work. 75% of the credentials we're awarding are awarded in the top 5 job sectors. So I believe at this point, it's a good time for me to kind of step out of the way when we're on top and let someone else come in and take us to the next version of KCTCS.
So you've already highlighted quite a few successes during your tenure, but what are some of the other high points that you've seen in the last 6 to 10 years when you've been in this position?
I think a big accomplishment is our colleges working closer with business and industry across the state to clearly identify what their needs are and us revamping programming to meet those needs. People criticize higher education all the time because we just keep adding programs and not all of our programs are really meaningful to the workforce. However, in the last 5 years since I took over, we've eliminated 2 programs for every new program that we've added because we've culled out those programs that are no longer turning out graduates that are in fields that they can get a good job in. So I think that's quite a bit of accomplishment and that our colleges have put that emphasis on talking and listening to business and industry and getting the type of meaningful credentials for the workforce.
Now, do you have, and this is kind of unfair to ask you, but do you have any desires when it comes to who your successor is or any advice for whoever comes after you?
No, I'm staying totally out of the search process.
Okay.
It will be a national search, and I'm sure that there will be interest from all over. This is a great state, the great Commonwealth of Kentucky. This is a tremendous system. It's got national attention in many ways. So I'm sure that will be a big pool of candidates. Now, as far as advice to the new person, I'd say be ready to be highly involved in the legislative process because this state is a very political state, as we know, and it takes a lot of working with the legislators to move the state forward.
And that is a perfect segue because I was going to ask you about some of the struggles that you've experienced in your time as president. And I'm sure one of them would have been, post-secondary education kind of being left behind in recent years. It's becoming more and more of a discussion. A lot of groups are trying to highlight it. The Chamber's about to release their 10-year leaky bucket update that shows just how far post-education funding has fallen.
Right.
You've been highlighting it quite a bit lately. So 2020 is a budget year for the state legislature. So what is your ask of them in 2020 in terms of what KCTCS needs over the next 2 years in terms of funding?
KCTCS is in the same boat as the 8 public universities in that we've been left behind in the funding decisions. And we understand that the state has had some tough issues to deal with, especially the pension crisis and so forth. But when Kentucky moved to a performance funding model 4 years ago, we were the only state in the union that, of the 30 some odd that are using performance funding, where the state legislature did not put additional money into the performance funding model. So basically, we had to start distributing money according to your success, according to the metrics of performance funding, without any new money. So you were just stealing money from each other, shifting money. And you could have an example where an institution truly improved on all 13 metrics that we're judged by, and yet they would lose hundreds of thousands of dollars in their funding because others improved more than they did. And that's really not a fair way to judge things. So what we're coming back for in the ask for this legislative session is to increase the performance funding pool over this next biennium, 6.2% in the first year and 8.8% in the second year. And that's for all post-secondary education institutions. We're all in agreement, the 8 university presidents and I are working with CPE to put that ask forward to the General Assembly.
Now, in terms of how much state funding universities get, it seems relatively small in terms of the overall budget of a university. But it has a big impact. So what are some of the impacts? You know, how far does that state money go for a university or for your college system, for instance?
Well, 20 years ago, the split between state funding and tuition funding, tuition revenue, was about 66% state funding and about 33% tuition. That's totally flipped now. So when you talk about the fact that our revenue of tuition and our state appropriations have flipped, we're down in that 200 some odd million from the state and about 400 million that we're generating from tuition revenue. Now what that's meant is that to the general public, they're seeing the rising cost of a higher education. But there is a correlation between the reduction in state appropriations. We're not like other states in that there's no local tax base that can help offset when the state cuts. We only have state appropriations and tuition revenue. So we're very conscious of that. We do not want to raise our tuition and make it so unaffordable that our students can't go to school here. But there has to be a balance because there is a cost in delivering education. One of the things that I'm also emphasizing during this legislative session is that the actual cost to educate a student and the revenue that we have, the actual dollars that we have, is at a level now that is lower than what we had back in 2004. 16 years later, and we're working at a less dollar per student average than what we did in 2004. And that's adjusted for inflation. So that's saying something that Kentucky hasn't made higher education as high a priority as it should in the budget allocation model.
And in terms of the budget allocation model, let's go back to performance-based funding real quick. So you're asking for more money within the performance-based funding
pool.
model. Are you asking, or do you feel that there are any other changes or moderations that need to be made to the performance-based funding system in order to, because we've had it for a couple of years now. Yeah. Obviously, there's going to be a couple bumps in the road. Is there anything else that needs to be fixed in terms of that system?
Yeah. This is the third year for performance funding to be in use. I sat on the committee that drew up the plan along with the university presidents and key legislators and CPE staff. And we knew when we developed the model that there would need to be some tweaking. And what happened in the legislation was that there was a recommendation that we go 3 years and then review it and make any kind of revisions. So at the end of this fiscal year, there will be a called meeting of that working group to review and to make any tweaks. I will say this, I am a huge supporter of the performance funding process. I think it's great for our institutions. It encourages them to focus in on metrics that are meaningful and that will help students succeed, and helps our businesses and industries in Kentucky to be getting an educated workforce that is in the areas that are most needed for this Commonwealth.
So that's another good transition. I want
Okay.
to talk next about the Business Education Roundtable. That's
Yeah.
a group that you're a part of.
Yes.
That brings education and business leaders together to help
Yeah.
move the state forward.
Yeah.
That group is really ramping up in recent years,
Yeah.
and there will be some asks, I'm sure, to improve all levels of education.
Yeah.
So tell me about some of those efforts and what it means for the coming years in terms of education funding and things
Sure.
like that.
Sure. There are 4 major goals of the Business Education Roundtable. One of them is early childhood education, which is critical that all students have the opportunity for early childhood and all-day kindergarten services. The second is a revision of high schools to where the high school diploma has more meaning to it. And the third is focused on higher education and our value in helping every adult obtain a meaningful certificate or diploma or associate degree or a bachelor's degree that will help them get employed in the Commonwealth. And the fourth is really the engagement of business industry in partnering with us in education. And if all the 4 goals, I think that fourth one is so critical to our future. We cannot do our job in higher education without a true partnership with business and industry. And what the Business Education Roundtable is saying, let's all work together. And so when we go to the General Assembly and say we need more money in the performance funding pool, we hope that we've got business and industry going right in there with us saying, yes, you do. Because what you do in education, in higher education, is fuel the workforce in Kentucky. And I think that's what's been great about the Business Education Roundtable. It's put those priorities of education and the value of education into what helps drive the economy in Kentucky.
And we have seen a lot of more partnership in recent years between education and business community.
Yeah.
So what are some of the examples of your schools working with employers over the last couple of years that you've really seen a positive impact of?
Probably one of the most visible one is called the Kentucky FAME program, which is working with the manufacturers in Kentucky where in an apprenticeship-like or work and learn environment where our college students that are majoring in advanced manufacturing fields are able to work 2 or 3 days a week in a factory and then come to school and get their theoretical work in the school 2 to 3 days a week. And so that application of their learning while they're in school in that work environment in a factory has been great. We now have 12 chapters of the Kentucky FAME across the state, which means at least 12 of our 16 community colleges are involved in that. And that has been a tremendous success. In fact, it's a national model and it's getting much recognition.
And we've seen a lot of improvement in workforce development over the last couple of years in Kentucky, but it's still a struggle for Kentucky employers to find the people that they need to fill their jobs. So what else do you think? I know we've got dual credits happening. We've got a lot of things, a lot of advancements have been done, but what else do you think needs to be done to really move forward in terms of workforce development?
First of all, I think some of the rhetoric that is used needs to be tweaked. You're hearing quite a bit of people say, not everyone needs a college education. That's not necessarily true. What they are saying many times is that not everyone needs a 4-year bachelor's degree to be successful in the workforce. If we're to really move forward, we have to not diminish the value of higher education. Higher education, in particularly what we're offering within the community colleges, is valuable to business and industry. And we need to stress that everyone needs to get more than a high school degree. They need to be able to move beyond that. I've been using this terminology now for a few years about what we're calling the career freeway. Now think about that analogy. If you've got an interstate highway, goes across our state, east and west or north and south, there are many on-ramps and then there are many exit ramps. Well, think about higher education in the same way. It is not the freeway where a student gets on education right after high school and then just stays on it until they finish a bachelor's degree and go into the workforce. That's not really the way education is working anymore. Instead, we have students coming to us from many different on-ramps. You talked about dual credit. We have high school students. This year, we'll have over 20,000 high school students taking dual credit with us. That's an on-ramp into higher education. Now, after they graduate from high school, some of those, in fact, our data shows that about 28% of those students who have taken dual credit with us, when they graduate from high school, they just go directly to the workforce. They've exited off of the education freeway. Others will stay with education through us or through a university and continue. But the important thing is that no matter if an individual goes to work or if they stop out, that higher education provides for them multiple on-ramps so that they can come back. And what we do, especially within KCTCS, is we have partnerships with business and industry in upskilling their current workforce, so that we have over 5,000 companies that we're working with. So when that individual who's maybe gotten a credential from us starts with a company, after a while they need to be upskilled. We're providing that on-ramp back for more education and more training to continue them going. We should not think of higher education as being a one and done. We're not. We're a continuous program of education. On-ramps and exit ramps all the way.
And is there any other ways or any new initiatives that could be done in terms of streamlining processes? For instance, perhaps stacking an associate's to help you get your bachelor's and things like that. Is there ways that Kentucky can do those kind of things to move forward as well?
Yeah, I think we really need to be thinking about what the future of work is going to be like. We hear all the time about the impact of technology in careers today and the impact of artificial intelligence and robots and so forth. And so what that is meaning for us is that we in higher education in particular have to rethink how we're developing our programming and how we're delivering our programming. The revolution is coming in higher education to where we're no longer thinking of it as seat-based or time-based education. Right now you think, I'm going to go to a community college, so I'm going to go for 2 years. Or I'm going to go to a university and go for 4 years. Well, that time-based is going out the windows, because really what we need to think of is an individual going and getting the competencies or skill sets that are necessary to go into a job or a career. And then as they need to move beyond that, they can come back into the educational institution and stack with that. So that means in our program development, we need to shorten our classes and our credentials into smaller bites, smaller modules, and then be able to stack them, as you said, as you go along. Now, some students will choose to stack one right after another, and it may take them 2 years to get that associate degree, or onto a bachelor's degree, and it may take them 4 years. But if a student can progress faster because they've already got knowledge of this, they've got work experience, maybe it only takes them a year to get that associate degree. Maybe it only takes them 2.5 or 3 years to get a bachelor's degree. Don't think about seat time of semester-based delivery. Think about skill sets and competencies that the student must learn to be able to prove that they've learned and earned that credential.
Absolutely. Now, is there anything that we haven't covered that you want people to know or that you want to discuss in this interview?
Well, I think Kentucky and what we're doing in higher education, specifically within KCTCS, is really on the forefront of the national movement for reinventing higher ed. I serve on President Trump's American Workforce Policy Advisory Board. It's a 25-member board made up primarily of CEOs of the top corporations in the United States, IBM, Apple, Xerox, others. And there's only 3 of us from higher education on that committee. But I was selected primarily because of our acknowledgement across the nation that we are on the cutting edge of being entrepreneurial and innovative in our delivery and so forth. And what is reinforcing to me and encouraging to me as I serve on that board is how similar what that national board's goals are to what we've been doing within the Business Education Roundtable. One of the major goals of the American Workforce Policy Board is that business and industry should be driving how education is going forward. And they have to partner with us to make that work. On the other side is getting bureaucracy at the federal level out of the way to make that happen. And one of the major changes that is being recommended by the American Workforce Policy Advisory Board is to move away from what we know of as a college transcript to what's called an interoperable learning record, an ILR. And what that would be is you think about your college transcript that has an A, B, C grade on it for each course. And as long as you make an A, B, C, or sometimes a D, you're considered passing. That doesn't tell an employer anything on the skill sets that you've accomplished. And so what we're working on the national level now is to develop these ILRs that instead of grades on a transcript, it will have skill sets that are learned and earned by that student as they move through their educational pathway. I think that will make a huge difference in the future. When employers get this ILR, they'll be able to say, oh, well, you've got this skill set, this skill set, this skill set. You're aligned with what we're looking for, and it'll make it easier for the hiring process and the success of that individual in that company.
Well, there's a lot of impressive things happening, especially in your college system. So thanks again for sitting down with me today, and
You're
hopefully
welcome.
we'll get another chance to chat before your retirement.
Thanks a lot.